back to A.R. Sales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I am A.R. Indivudally, and today I am joined by the entity known as JT Blakely. But if they take the super rings off, it is Jeff Elkins and JP Rindfleisch. I really hope I didn't butcher that name up.
You didn't. It was perfect.
Yeah, nicely done.
Ninja right through that. But they are co-host of an awesome podcast revolving around Kindle Vella, and I've been obsessed with that whole thing. Honestly, the whole movement of Kindle Vella, like how I feel it's like changing. It's almost like the switch from YouTube to TikTok. I think it's just like the progression, and like I think it's like the future wave of writing. So without further ado, Jeff JP aka JT Blakely, how are y'all doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us on. Really excited
to
come on and talk about the work. And yeah, I think Vella's a weird, interesting thing. It's one of those things, like I feel like Amazon's always rolling stuff out and you get like a 50-50 chance if it's going to be amazing and exciting, or if it's going to be like, you know, Kindle Worlds, and like a great idea that just kind of like fades off into the distance and no one sees. So, but we're giving it a shot. We're going to go at it.
I haven't even heard of Kindle Worlds.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
That's how that rolls.
That reminds me of the first episode of BoJack Horseman, where they're talking to the publisher from Penguin, and there's like, oh, well, have you heard of a mystery fantasy series called the Magical Mystical Land of Narnia? It's like, no, I haven't. It's like, then why did we spend $20 million in marketing?
Exactly.
Now, to go right into it, for the people that are unaware, where can people find your work? Twitter accounts, Instagram, websites, whatever it may be.
So for me, you probably just heard my co-host for the Serial Fiction Show on your show, Christine Deigel.
Yep.
So we do that, and we're booked all the way through January with episodes coming out every week.
Mm-hmm.
And we interview people. It's so much fun to interview people and get fun little tidbits about how to write some excellent Vella. But yeah, we have 30 episodes live as of this coming week. And so that's where people can find me, serialfictionshow.com. I also do another podcast called the Right Away Podcast with Chris Kane. That one, we talk a lot about craft. We do book clubs every month. And I pretty much hang around Instagram under JP_Rindfleisch. If you can spell Fleischmann's vodka, you can spell Rindfleisch. Hey. And you'll hear about all my releases there.
Nice, yeah. And I am on... I have two series out there right now. The first one's called The Adventures of Watkins and Howe, and it is a supernatural detective series that follows Moneta Watkins and Stacy Howe through the streets of Baltimore as they solve mysteries. It's a lot of fun. Moneta can relive people's memories, so that's a fun one. You can get, and then my other series is called The Defense of Reality, and it is about homeless superheroes that battle monsters in the streets of cities that people don't know exist. So that's those are my two series that are currently out. You can get them really wherever you buy a book. You can get them on Amazon or Kobo or Barnes and Noble or wherever you want. On the internet world, on Instagram, I'm Jeff Elkins Writer, and on Twitter I am JFF Elkins, because my handle was, because I'm old, and my handle was formed before I knew I was like setting up a permanent address for something. So that's that's where you can find me, everywhere.
And what podcast do you do?
Oh, and if you're a writer, I'm the Dialogue Doctor. I do the Dialogue Doctor podcast.
Damn, that is
every Monday.
Awesome title.
Thanks.
Yeah,
it's an excellent
we just
podcast.
We just work on dialogue and like teach dialogue, edit dialogue, all things dialogue.
Well, all links that they were just mentioned will be in the description if you're hearing this, and if you're on YouTube, it'll be in the the banners and everything. So make sure, pick up the book. Mr. Jeff has 10 outside of what he was just talking about with the Vella thing. So I mean, you need to at least give a peek into that. Mr. JP also has a lot of workout podcasts. All these things will be available. Make sure to check them out. Pick up the book. Support these authors. Now, a little backtracking for the people that were unaware before we started talking before hitting record. JT Blakely is basically the Voltron unison of both of you, because as they were describing to me, I'm a virgin to Kindle Vella. Okay, I'm completely new. This is out of my element completely.
I think we're all fresh to it. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I haven't even had my first kiss yet. You know, I'm hoping for a slow dance on like the elementary school dance.
Nice.
We're gonna see how it goes. You know,
stepping up to the plate to go to bat for the first time.
Oh yeah.
Hoping to at least round second. Yeah.
It'll be sliding. It'll be sliding.
Sliding in.
Yeah.
Barely getting there.
Yeah. But basically, for people that are also unaware, when you make, let's say that you want to co-author something with a person, you can't put both of your names on a work. You have to go as a unison, put together name. JT Blakely is the name that they have chosen for their work, NRDS, which is an abbreviation, NRDS, for National Recently Deceased Services. So let's just dive right into that. How is that going? Just everything about that. One, the story, if you can get a little bit into it without getting into spoilers. How is it going with season 1 and the progression of seasons? And just in general, how is it to co-author a Kindle Vella work?
Yeah, well, I'll talk story first. Are you okay with that, JP?
Go right ahead.
Yeah, you know me. I'm just gonna jump in. If you don't like put your hand up and be like, Jeff, shut up. I'll just keep talking. So NRDS is all about this government agency that is stationed all over the country, but our story takes place in the Midwest in a small town. And the job of this long ago forgotten government agency is to care for ghosts in graveyards. So they are like the social workers of ghosts in graveyards. They deal with hauntings. They show up and handle things. It's a comedy horror. So it's kind of like, if you think like The Office meets Ghostbusters, that's kind of what we're going for. And the story follows Ethan, a young new agent, and his like progression through into this agency and his like learning curve, and as he works alongside these like one old grizzled agent, one kind of like superstar maverick, crazy boss, a new social media director. He's kind of navigating all of that as he learns what it means to care for these ghosts in these graveyards. Did I miss anything, JP? Was there anything you put in that?
I would say that's pretty much it. Yeah, we really wanted to basically have a sitcom, and we wanted some spooky sitcom going on. So it's really an homage to, The Office, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I've been watching that like nobody's business. And Ghostbusters, all of those 80s style, like we just want it to feel like that. So we also have just a lot of stuff going around the hometown and how much they're against this government agency coming in, because this is their first remote location outside of Washington, D.C. So it's kind of just fun interacting with the neighborhood as well.
Yeah, and lots of the government agency dealing with like, our real job is like any government agency is to sit down and fill out paperwork, and like it's pretty mundane. But then the whole like, the town struggling with the idea that there's a government agency here that's tasked to deal with ghosts and not believing that that's real. And so playing off of all of those tensions as well.
My God, I need to hire you too, because that is probably one of the best like pitches I've heard ever. If I was sitting across from me and I had money to give you money for that, forget about it. This would be on Netflix within a couple months. We will take
money. Yeah. So if anybody wants to give money, I'm always open to money. And amounts will vary. Like I'm easy. You can actually get me for a cheap amount. But yeah, no, we're excited about it, and it's really, it's a fun series. It's lighthearted, like COVID. We don't have time for like serious drama right now. Like, who needs any more like deep thinking pieces? This is just stupid fun with ghosts and bureaucracy. It's great.
And some of the best part about writing with Jeff is, he currently writes the first drafts, and then I come in and I'll do some of the revising, and I'll read it and I'll be like, what can I do to make Jeff laugh the next time he reads this? So I'll just add as many stupid things as I can, and then he'll just like
every time
he'll highlight and be like, oh my God, I'm on the floor. I'm like, yes. And I do the same thing in the first draft when I'm reading that through. I'm just like, oh, this dialogue, that everything that you put in it, it's so funny.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and you're selling yourself short, because I write the first draft, but JP actually plots out the scene. So JP writes the beats to the scene. I then put kind of like meat on those bones, and then JP makes it look pretty and nice and readable.
Skin and makeup over that.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's our process, but it's a ton of fun to write. The characters, like just being able to say like, oh, we're just gonna go sometimes wacky fun, sometimes sentimental fun, sometimes gross goofy fun, like just being able to like plug into all of those different avenues of comedy has been great.
My God, I have so many things to ask. And to get right off the bat, I love that idea, that trope. I will never get tired of that trope, like in Umbrella Academy, or also as of recently, like Loki. The idea that you reduce something as crazy as time to a bureaucratic cubicle type of job. To me, there is nothing funnier than that. That is just inherently amazing humor, because we can all relate to being, because like, basically, that's hell. Like we all like understand like the crazy nuisance and like how soul sucking that can be, and that like the way that you can attribute that to something as like, I don't know, ominous, like something as crazy as time, something like something that we don't even understand, and just like bringing it down to something that we can all understand. I think that is just inherently funny. And just the red tape, who hasn't come across that at some point in their life,
Yeah, I think the reason it works so well for comedies is that you can put these characters into a setting that we all understand and know, right? Like we all get, like most of us get what it's like to go to an office every day and do a job that like you really don't care about, but like this is the paycheck that I'm going to get. Whether it's an office, you're like working a fast food place, which I've done,
warehouse,
warehouse, I've done, like
working
working all those like crap jobs that I'm like, well, I got children to feed, like, so like I will show up at 9 and do this thing, and I will leave at 5 and not care. Like, I think, but being able to like build that setting, and then it gives you a platform to like really explore fascinating and fun characters, which is I think what makes the piece work.
Yeah, and it was really fun to add in that element, because I work in quality, and for a time I worked at a medical radioisotope facility, and we were trying to get material approved for FDA approval. So there was tons of red tape that we had to get through, and you're talking like we had procedures that you had to follow it to a T, and if you didn't do step A before B, you had to fill out a deviation paper. And if you didn't complete that on time, you had to fill out another deviation paper. And it just kept going and going. And it's just so maddening. And so to be able to kind of like art representing life, put that in this is just so much fun, because I'm just like, I know exactly what this looks like.
God, I cannot get enough of that level of concept. So to dive into a little bit more, because I am a huge fan of comedy, how do you then treat that how do you portray it in your writing? Comedy is something that we've all grown, I would say most of it has grown up on. It's a TV medium. You watch comedian, when they say a joke, their body language of that joke is 50% of what's selling you on that joke. So how do you convey that through a body of text? How do you convey those emotions? How do you do that?
It's been an interesting trick. So because we are like missing the like visual nature of it, and in that like big cast that we're writing, where you've got like 6 people sitting around an office together, when you're watching TV, your eye can kind of track all 6 of them at one time. So as we're writing the Vella, the question is like, how do we keep all of these people engaged in the reader's mind, and how do we keep this moving? And so what JP and I have tried to do is really just center the piece and the comedy on the dialogue. So it's about the interchange between the characters. It's about getting character voices that really pop loud and that like you're going to remember, and getting those characters to stand out in their personalities, so that as you're reading it, you can visualize it. And our goal is that like when you sit down to read the text, you really just get this deep visual image of the room, and you feel like you're sitting there watching it, so you can kind of dive right into it. That's the hope. That's what we're going for, is that you so fall in love with the characters and like being around them that you just start to live the moment as you read the book, the book. Yeah.
That's actually a conversation I had with a friend of mine about like kind of how sitcoms work, with like why you become so deeply ingrained in it. And my theory that I had with it is that when you first watch a TV show, you're watching BoJack and you're watching The Office, those hijinks are funny because like the environment, you wouldn't do those situations, or you relate to those situations. So it's like either extremes and you're going with it. But as you get to learn and grow with that character and you know what they do, you know how they will act when just certain stimuli are represented with them. So when the episode little 15-second thing before the title sequence kicks in is them being hit with, it's like, you know, Dwight being hit with like another line of like red tape, you know exactly what the next 20 minutes are about and you get excited for it because now you know how that person will react depending on the stimuli.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's been really great about working with JP is that we've been able to together just design some really fantastic personalities. Like, I'll let JP speak to his favorite character, but my favorite is this old kind of grizzled vet named Buck, who the story actually starts. There's a mystery underlining the plot in that Buck is this old, like ready to retire kind of legendary agent working in Chicago, and he gets this call that's like, hey, we're setting up this new office in the middle of nowhere, but the secret reason we're setting it up is because there's something weird happening in this town, and so you got to go and figure it out. So I love Buck because he's just got that like no nonsense, I'm too old for this crap, Danny Glover and Lethal Weapon kind of attitude to him, which for me is just kind of like ripe for constant fun in that kind of office setting.
Yeah, I also really like Buck. And one of our rules for Buck is he has very short dialogue, and he's basically like this retired character. And so we have a very talkative protagonist who gets one-word responses all the time because Buck has no interest in having conversation. He just wants to get his job done. But then we also include Buck's husband, and whenever his husband is around, Buck opens up more, and it's really fun to see that change of character because he would do that. And that's what's been really fun working with Jeff, is because he will kind of talk me through like, well, this is how dialogue works, and you know, some of these things are inherent, but it's really cool to kind of get that reassurance through our conversations. Yeah, and then I guess another character I really like is Alexis. I have her modeled in my head after Rosa in Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Just unhappy, very negative person, doesn't want to be there as well, but in a different way than Buck, and you can see that on the page, and it's really fun.
Yeah, and then we kind of throw on top of that, like there's a character we're calling Bob, which is not actually his name. It stands for Bag of Bones. He's like a ghost that works for the agency, and they carry him around in a bag. And he's constantly trying to get his real name into conversations, but nobody ever lets him actually get it in. He's a Korean war vet who died in the war, but the secret is that he's never actually seen any action. He worked in the motor pool. He died in a freak accident, but he runs around like he's a all-star Marine. So he, you know, throwing in a crazy character like that, just with a Alexis and a Buck, and then the kind of wide-eyed, naive lead character, Ethan, it just makes it fun. It's just a fun setting to play in.
God damn, I am in love with that. Honestly, that is phenomenal. Now, do you treat the episode like, are they episodic, or is it? Well, you said there's a lingering mystery. So, how do you treat it? Is it more like a Rick and Morty type of thing where you just kind of do whatever you want, and then when you feel like adding lore and like a deeper sense of the world, you can do that at your whim, or do you switch kind of on either side?
So I would say that the first 11 episodes are a bit more episodic. We're really just setting character in. We're really letting you get to know people, letting you get to know what the day-to-day job is. And then we start to introduce a thicker thread that kind of carries through. Now, some of our episodes, because we wanted to keep to roughly about 2,000 words, some of our scenes are like a little bit longer. So we have like a part 1, part 2, but we definitely cut it off in an appropriate part just so that people, you know, aren't compelled to continue. We want them to, but not in the same sense that we're like, give us your money.
Yeah, well, and part of the idea of Vella is that, like, you know, you're going to be able to read this on your phone, like while you're like, you know, on the subway going to work, or if you're just like got like 10 minutes waiting outside of a doctor's office. The idea of Vella is that you can just like pop it open and get like a 15-minute read in there, get a good scene, get a good laugh, you know, feel something through the text. And then go on about your day, so that you don't have to like be carrying this novel around with you everywhere, that you don't have to like, oh, I don't want to pick that up because I know the next chapter is like 15 pages and I'm not going to finish that. But like, you know, you can just get that like 2,000 words in, which comes to like 7 pages, have a good laugh, get like the start and end of a story, and then pick it up again when you're ready.
And then I would say around between episodes 6 and 8, you've kind of got a feel for where the thread is beginning, and then we just really start going after that.
Yeah, running deep into the bigger plots. So it is a little like well, to go back to JP's comparison of Brooklyn Nine-Nine, right? Like each week you've got kind of like the problem of the episode, but then there's the on-running plot of like, what's going on with Jake and Amy, and what's happening with Terry's children. And so we have those kind of underlying plots as well of like, the struggle with the office itself, and why is this office being brought into existence, and then the town's kind of push back on the office, and then will Ethan ever actually read the manual is kind of one of the ongoing jokes. So it's got both the like episodic, so you can pick it up and put it down, and the like long running plots that like if you want to engage in it long term, we've got 24 episodes, we've got 12 episodes written, 24 episodes sketched out. So if you want to engage in it for all 24 episodes of it, it's going to have that long running plot too.
That is awesome. And then how are you going to treat it on a season base? Is it going to be 24 episodes per season, or is that just how you have it so far, and kind of gauge it as everything goes?
So we've been discussing kind of like what this season's plot is going to be, and we have a twofold plot, one that's more of the city base, and then one that's more about the job basically. And we want to resolve those by the end of the season. And based off of the points that we need to hit, we're probably looking at probably about 60 episodes. Probably is where we're going to end up. If
JP's
not more.
The plot master. I just do what he says. Yeah.
Plot master and dialogue doctor.
Exactly. So I think
we're
we're
like
looking
a superhero
at
team.
Yeah, I like it. It's great. So I think we're looking at between like 60 and 75 episodes for first season, and then we'll look into what we want to do for the next season.
Now, do you have any inspirations for comedy writing? Like I would say that my gold star for writing, I mean, just in general, is Douglas Adams. I mean, the comedy that the man was able to convey through text, insane to me.
Yeah, he's
so
sharp.
Yeah, so do you have any kind of North Stars that you point yourself towards?
I gotta think about that. That's a good question. I'm reading some Elmore Leonard right now, and he's made me laugh out loud a couple times, which is good. It's less the kind of comedy we're writing right now, because his is more like, snarky dark than it is the more like hijinks type comedy. But yeah, JP, anybody come to mind for you?
So I really like whimsy. That's where my style is. So for me, I really like reading Neil Gaiman because I love that narrator voice that carries through, and a lot of the time that has a lot of comedy to it. So if there's any way that I can emulate him, I do my best to, without copying. So I would say that that's where I get my written comedy from.
Now, for the writers out there, I have to say, there's something you really picked up on. That you said that like a lot of it, the comedy bases on dialogue, and your podcast is the Dialogue Doctor. So, what are your insights of dialogue? What are for tips that are for people out there? What would you give them?
Yeah, so man, that's a big question. So got a whole podcast on it. So dialogue has to be, if you're thinking as a writer, you want to think about dialogue as like the center of your work. So I started the Dialogue Doctor about a year ago. And when I started it, I come to dialogue from my professional life, not necessarily as a writer first. So when I started doing it, I was like, is that really a thing? Or is dialogue being central to work a thing? Or am I just like making that up? And so I went and got all these, best-selling, top-selling authors through history. Like I looked at Neil Gaiman, and I looked at all the Harry Potter books, and I looked at Ernest Hemingway, and I looked at like Pride and Prejudice, and like I pulled like 7 books down, and I just went through with a highlighter, and I highlighted every line that was dialogue in one color, and I highlighted every line that was prose in another color. And what I found is that in these books that we treasure and that we love, they're like 70, 80, sometimes 90% dialogue, just in the pure structure of the page, right? Like great writers carry and convey the story with dialogue. And the reason that is because we're verbal creatures. So like you can think about every relationship you've ever had, whether it's your mom or, you know, your romantic partner or your next door neighbor that you hate or the teacher that like, you know, was awful to you in school. You can think of all of those relationships and you can probably sum them up in a series of conversations, because that's how we connect to each other and how we learn about each other. So for a writer, dialogue is critical because it is how your reader is going to connect to your character. It's how they're going to know their personality. It's how they're going to learn about who they are. It's how they're going to learn their wants and desires, right? Like we learn by talking to one another. So our readers engage our characters by watching our characters talk to each other and imagining our characters' voices in their head. Like Robert McKee in his book Dialogue puts it this way. He says that writers actually have an advantage over theater and TV, because in theater and TV, we watch characters interact and there's an actor up there that's working as a medium between the character's voice and the person consuming, right? Like, so when I watch The Office, I'm watching Steve Carell's version of that character and he's interpreting that character voice for me. So it's not actually in my mind, but McKee says like as a reader, authors have an advantage because if we can write really strong dialogue, our readers will take stronger ownership of our characters than they ever will watching TV or a movie, because they're actually imagining that character and taking that character's voice and putting it through their own brain and mouth and then like translating that character into their own image. So for us, if we can focus on dialogue and make dialogue central to our work, then we can really give our reader ownership of our characters and engage them in a deep way, which is part of what JP and I are trying to do with Nerds, is create this brilliant cast of characters that we find funny, and so hopefully that engagement will connect the reader and that the reader will get the levity as well. That's the hope.
God damn. Well said. That was awesome. Mind blown. So dialogue in itself is something that, I mean, as you said, humans are inherently motivated and driven by communication. So it's a conversation. It's almost like the question of like, where is God? The conversation of dialogue is endless. We can talk about it for as long as humans are still human, I guess. Like maybe it'll start tapering off when we merge into the robots. But if you're interested as a writer into any of that, make sure to go have a listen to Dialogue Doctor. Sounds absolutely phenomenal. I know you just got one new listener right here. And going off with the conversation of dialogue, how you spoke about Buck and how you love writing that character. It immediately made me think, are there any characters that you find difficulty writing? That you actually find a challenge to like find that voice, because either maybe too close for home, or maybe so far that it's hard to really relate.
I can talk to that, JP, or you want to take that one first? It's your call.
I think I'll let you go first.
Okay. So yeah, there's a couple characters in our cast that I really struggle with. There's a character named Melissa, who's the office boss. Melissa is like prideful and, very much wants to present herself as the boss. Like, so her voice is a lot of declaratory statements. She says a lot of, like, she'll declare a lot of things that she doesn't actually have the backing to do. Alexis is very quick to remind her, like, yeah, you can't do that. And so, like, I think in episode 4, she tries to fire somebody, and Alexis is like, yeah, you can't just fire people. Like, you got to fill out paperwork. Like, you can't. And she's like, well, then I'm filling out the paperwork for you. But it's, so her voice has been really tough for me to get. And I think part of that is just because I struggle with her to keep her realistic and not make her too bizarro world weird, because she only shows up on occasion. Like, we've only got her in like 3 or 4 episodes, so she like pops in and pops out. So she's been a tough one for me to grab. I think, but that's what's great about writing with a partner, because JP has her down. So he comes behind me and fixes her. The other one I think is there's a stoner in the office named River. I also really struggle with
the
River.
flow. Okay.
Yeah.
I like
it.
And
I think part of that is because I'm like a 90-year-old man at heart inside. Like, I am Buck on the inside. So I try to get River's voice in my head, and I'm like, oh, God damn it. don't want it. So, but
Get a
that's
job,
why-
hippie.
Yeah, put the blood down and go to work. So but that's why it's great to have JP as a partner, because JP fixes all of my river nonsense. Yeah.
I guess I would say that, which is super compliment, is that Buck and Bob are probably some of my harder ones to do, just because I don't relate to them as much. But at the same point, like I can still get that vibe. So one thing also that the Dialogue Doctor has is free resources for people, and we're using them for this as well, which you basically have your character and you talk about like what their voice is as like a baseline. So me talking on this podcast right now would relatively be like a baseline voice. This is how I talk generally and normally. If I'm in a more anxious situation, I may speak, in a different manner. I may have shorter things that I say, or I may ramble on forever, so on and so forth. I'm basically talking like I know when Jeff should be the one talking about it. But anyways, what I want to say is that those resources are also available on that podcast, because he goes through them. So just throwing that out there. And that has been an excellent tool for how to write these voices, because if I don't know, I can look at that. I can look at what notes we've made. So our character Melissa makes very declarative sentences. If I'm reading it and I'm like, ooh, I don't know what we've said about Melissa, and I don't know if this meets what we've mentioned about her, I can look back at this. I can see what the little quirks that we have about her are, and I can punch it back up.
Yeah, and that's it. I think writing so many characters for like a plan of like 60 episodes, we got to be tracking it somehow. Like, because already, like I was on episode 5 or 6, and I was reading something. We were both editing at that point, because we had like drafted it and edited it, and we were passing it back and forth. And we were reading one of the characters, and I was like, I have no idea how this person is supposed to sound. So I had to go back and look at her chart and go, oh, that's right. He asks a ton of questions, and he's always confused about the topic that's going on in the room. And but he doesn't want to let on that he's confused. So he asks questions like, right, guys? Like, we know it, right? Like, this is what happens next. So it's, but yeah, so the charts come in handy to fill out. They're a good tool to use. And having a partner that contrasts you in voice, because like Bob and Buck are like my go-to. If you want an angry Marine, I can write that. But a 20-something stoner, that's not my wheelhouse. So.
I don't know what that says about me, but thanks.
Oh man, that is just phenomenal, just and fascinating. Just even the whole dialogue between young and old. There was one time that I got a note from somebody that when you're younger, you generally speak in shorter sentences, and when you're older, you speak with more sentences. You just talk with the commas and like semicolons already like it planted in. When you're younger, it's just shorter thoughts, ideas. Let's go get ice cream. Let's go to the park. What's your mom doing today? Whatever, XYZ, right? I don't know why that last question came in there. That's a weird question to ask like an 8-year-old, but whatever. I guess it leads into the next scene, right?
Yeah,
so
yeah. That's what's good about a Vella. You got
That's
2,000
improv,
words.
yeah.
You're done. I don't have to deal with why I asked the 8-year-old that question. I can move on to I'll deal with that in the next episode.
That's in the commentary. It's like, hey, that's not weird. I talked to my therapist about it.
It's all good.
Yeah. The hand puppet agreed. So, Jesus. So
my invisible therapist. My best friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one thing that immediately made me think of, as you were mentioning all these characters, is your inspiration for the characters. I have a sneaking suspicion that some of them are derived from people that you've worked with in the past or know. But is it all encompassing?
Yes.
Is it all encompassing? Is every character inspired from someone that you've met? Or are there certain characters that you create to rise to a purpose? Like, we need this. Let's create this.
It's both and. Like, I think for me, I think I had the biggest hand in creating Buck. For me, Buck didn't actually come from somebody I know. It comes from like an attitude in the dark recesses of my soul, which is like, I don't want to deal with this shit. Like, so that's kind of where Buck comes from. And so like, just projecting that out into the world, like, okay, how does somebody get that like persona in this world? That's where Buck came from. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's another character that I created that I can speak to. Bob was your idea. Bob wasn't my idea. Yeah. Yeah. And Gary was your idea. Gary's Buck's partner.
Mm-hmm.
Gary has a very distinct voice and it's fantastic. It very much balances out Bug. I guess Ethan was my voice. Or was Ethan your voice? I guess Ethan was our voice. It's hard to separate whose it was.
So I think the really fun part is that even though we have these imaginations as to what these characters are, we're both very different on how we approach them. So like for Jeff, apparently Buck is his deep recesses of his soul. Interesting.
Like it's my desire just to like retire and go spend time by myself in the dark.
Fair. And then for me, that emulates off of a couple characters that I've seen off of TV, but also like some people that I know in my life. And like the Alexis character emulates some of my deeper feelings. So I guess that's where that one comes from. But like even the Melissa character, she's partly named Melissa because part of her personality comes from some of the characters that Melissa McCarthy plays. In my opinion. See?
That's landing that voice for me. I wish you had told me that like 5 episodes ago.
Maybe if you looked at the research where I have pictures of the characters, you would know, but you don't. So
Jeff doesn't research well.
Now that's your inner joke. Now it's like when will he read the resources?
He told me he will not read any of the lore. So that's one of my passes, is to make sure that cemetery names have the right names, or that they're going down the right road.
If he was like, I'm gonna make a Bible for the Buck, I was like, go for it. I go read it.
I'm not religious.
I was like, and if I read it, I won't remember what it is. That's why I use charts, because you can like put it all in a document and I'll be like, I don't know. Yeah.
My wife uses post notes.
Yeah, I use a lot of post-it notes. Yeah. Sometimes I'll put it for JP, I'll just put something in brackets and it's like, name this. Yeah.
You have done that. But like,
this thing.
I'm terrible
As
at
insert
names.
character name goes to the bathroom.
Yep.
He did that already. Yep.
Yeah, Ethan gets out of the car and walks to name of cemetery.
Oh, that's fun. That must have been fun to go through. That's like playing ad-lib, basically.
Yeah.
So you can have
really
your
like it.
version and then like the version that you just shared between you two.
Yeah, I told JP before we came on the podcast with you today that part of the reason I love writing with him is he puts up with all my bullshit. So it's
it's fun. It's like playing with a piece of clay and then being like, I'm just gonna fix this. And
yeah.
And you come back in the 3 hours and the hand is sagging a little bit. You're like, son of a bitch, I thought I put that there.
And Jeff, the 5-year-old writer, has like smashed something, and you're like, damn it, Jeff. We had
let me go back to
here.
the chart.
Let me go back to the chart.
Now
Yeah,
you brought up something that I actually wanted to segue into, which was the lore. How do you handle the lore and how do you develop it? And again, do you draw from any inspirations of like historical? Because Ghost, there's thousands of things that you can draw inspiration from, or do you just go fully your own, more based on the bureaucracy and then just twinkle in some Ghost thing on top of it?
I do what JP tells me to do.
So when we
right.
Exactly, I'm fine with that. So actually how this Vella started was I messaged Jeff with a collection of other authors when Serial Fiction Show was just beginning, and I was like, hey Jeff, are you doing a serial? Because you'd be someone I want to pop on this podcast. He's like, no.
You just said, are you doing a serial?
Yeah. And
I was like,
you were
yeah,
like,
let's
no.
do one together.
Well, like Captain Crunch, or like
yeah, no, basically. But yeah, no, he was like, hey, I'm not, but let's do one together. And I was like, oh no, okay. So then we had a meeting together to talk about like what we wanted to do. And this story comes off of a short story that Jeff had written, with a very similar concept to episode 2, with kind of the basic going in and doing kind of that services for the recently deceased. And then I came in and I was like, here, let's throw in some story lore. And so the whole bureaucracy stuff is partially based off of a lot of my experience with quality. And I don't know about stuff with Jeff, but I know that at least for me, that's where a lot of that lore comes from, is a lot of that bureaucracy, because I've lived it. And then the Ghost stuff, I've always been a fan of weird occult stuff. So I throw out as much as I can. And then I'm like, Jeff, which stuff do you want to do? And he throws out ideas too. And then we kind of agree on what's too crazy.
Yeah, I think the initial short story came from I was obsessing over the spiritualist movement for a little while that took place in like, turn of the century America. That was way bigger than I think I realized as I was like reading about it and listening to a podcast about it, and just like kind of diving into it, just recognizing like, oh, there was a period in history where like America was obsessed with ghosts, like really, like even down to like the White House having seances, like hugely obsessed with like ghosts and the supernatural. And so I originally for the short story, I had this like weird idea that was like, what if there's a government agency formed at some point out of that moment that was like, oh, you guys deal with the ghosts that we're obsessed with, but like America does, America moved on to like the next fad, but this government agency continues to exist. So and I think the idea of the government agency, like JP said, is what drew JP in, because he's like, oh yeah, I've been there. So it's that's where we started from. But then I can't start a book without a short story to start with. So I always start with a short story. So I gave JP like, I think I gave you 3 ideas of like, these are all short stories. Yeah. So but that was the one that connected. And then it's great to have a partner that's in this, enjoys research and enjoys like figuring out the puzzle of it. Because I tell you what, in my first series that I wrote, I got in so much trouble because I didn't do any world building before I wrote it. I just like built the world as I went, and I finished the first book and I was super excited about it, and I put it up on Amazon, and a whole bunch of people read it, and it got out there, and finally this big time reviewer on Amazon, he's like in the top 100 Amazon reviewers, because they do rank those things, which is weird. He put on there, he's like, man, love the book, really great. I don't know why nobody has a gun though. And I was like, oh crap, why aren't they using guns? And I'm like, the answer is like, I don't really like guns, but that's not really good enough for the homeless monster fighters. So I had to like write book 2. I was like, oh, well, now I gotta figure out why they're not using guns. So anyway, for somebody who's like bad at world building, it's great to have a partner that can just like grab the idea of ghosts and a bureaucracy and be like, okay, we got to have levels, we got to work out like how these ghosts work, we got to work out like what the office is doing with them. Yeah, so that's how the lore kind of came about. It's that collaboration between like Jeff had a wild hair and JP actually made it work, and now a series is out.
But honestly, I think that's more stylistic than anything else. I mean, how many horror movies have you seen that you look at and you're like, wait a minute, nobody has phone chargers?
Yeah,
nobody can get a hotspot, where it's just, oh, we're fucked. Okay, no, that makes sense. But still, I'm in love with that, because everything you said, honestly, it reminds me of how reading Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy first was, where it's like you're reading it through and like you get kind of like a classic idea of like, okay, I'm with it. All right, there was a time that America went through that, and like, okay, and then it hits you with just that logical thing of like, oh yeah, but as things go, we forgot about it, and you're like, yeah, of course, that's what exactly what would happen. I feel like the kind of obvious left road would be to like, oh, and it continued forever, and this is kind of like one of those children's stories that like, oh, it's been going on huge, but you just don't know about it. Instead, you have the right turn, where it's just like, the buildings are kind of like whatever. You have a lot of people that are like, I don't even know about the ins and outs of the story yet, but I can assume that the fact that a person like a stoner kid is working there shows to the moral function, like, like how well the institution is doing, right?
They couldn't fire him if he tried.
Yeah,
exactly.
Like I live in Baltimore, so like I go down to DC all the time, and you walk through DC and you're like, man, there's all these government agencies, and I have no idea what any of them do. Like there's just building after building after building, hundreds of thousands of people working for this agency, and I have literally zero idea what they even do. And that's kind of like the world we're trying to couch in, is like, yeah, the government's massive, and there's so many things that happen around the country that are like done by the government, and you have like I grew up in New Orleans, and I remember hearing that like, oh, the levees were built by the Army Corps of Engineers. And I was so confused. I was like, are they the army, or are they engineers, or are they engineers that are drafted by the army? Like, I was so lost. The answer is none of those things. So it's like, well, they are engineers, but that kind of like yeah, just like the place that are, you know, playing with that world of like just being lost in the, you know, all the inner workings and gears that it takes to run a country, and just like being able to be like, yeah, this thing has existed now for 80 years and everybody's forgotten about it. Nobody even knows it's there. It's some line in some government budget that nobody reads. And every year Congress is like, pass that thing. Like, you know,
Yep.
yeah.
God, the elements I love of it, 'cause really good humor is almost like existential when you sit down and you think about it, right? And just that idea that like something kind of like runs along and that like type of thing, I think it is inherently amazing humor for the characters, because you have the characters that kind of believe in the system, right? That like, you know, like think they have the authority to like fire people whenever they want because they believe in the rigidity of the system. It's like, well, we're in a hierarchy here. I'm in this position. You're here. Thus, I can do whatever I want. And then there's people that can step back from that and been like, yeah, this entire thing is ridiculous. And then they respond in that way. But and in reality, they're both right and they're both wrong. But it's that whole thing is what creates. It's like the flint and the rock. It's like that's what creates the fire every time, the conflict and the resolution immediately. And just to me, that's what comedy is like on. And like the fact I just thought about that just from hearing about your stuff, it's just I am honestly floored. I'm actually really, really, this is awesome. Honestly, if you are not sold on it, you need to start reading this.
You gotta get
story. You gotta get it.
It might go away. You should get it now.
Yeah,
it might go away. So
yeah, you gotta play hard to get. It's like, oh, maybe I don't want your drink. Ever thought of that?
If people don't buy it tomorrow, we'll take it down, and then everybody will be talking about it, and you'll have missed it. Exactly. So you should go get it right now.
And then you're gonna get FOMO, and then your cat is gonna, I don't know, lose an eye or something.
Yeah.
That's not contractual. I don't want to get any emails, and if I get, I won't read it. But
all emails about cats losing eyes, please go to AM.
Yeah.
All of them.
All of them.
Yeah, I think comedy and horror for me have a similar thread, and that's taking something that you're familiar with and then spinning it on its head. And there are two directions that you can take with that. One of that is to make it either somewhat grotesque, either in form or in feature, and then another is to make it humorous in some fashion, make it absurd, make it surreal. And so taking, you know, my experience with having to deal with paperwork that goes on to like 10 different forms because someone didn't fill out the first one. Yep. And then expanding that to being completely unable to make your job daily decisions is just hilarious to me because it is absurd. And I love bringing that kind of idea into the writing.
Oh my God, I'm telling you. Now, just kind of like to bat it home, can you drop anything of specific details on the lore, or maybe like specific jokes / situations that you really pat yourself on the back of like, oh man, we nailed that one, that you can think of without spoiling
favorite
too much
situations?
Yeah.
Oh, I got two. Can I go first? Or do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Go right ahead.
Okay. So my favorite like funny situation is the secretary in the office who's old and trying to stay relevant to her job. At some point before the story started,
the characters you have in here.
Yeah, she filled out a form to allow her to hire an intern to start a social media presence. So there's a guy in the office who only works part-time, whose job is to like follow everybody around with an Instagram camera, but which is weird because they're this like government agency dealing with ghosts. They don't really want to talk to the public, but this well-meaning secretary has hired this like social media consultant who's like following everybody around with this camera. So that gets them in major trouble. There's a mayoral election happening in town, and that gets them in huge trouble with the mayors because now the mayors are going to use them as like their platform of like, stop this government overreach into our small town. You know, if you elect me mayor, I will stand up for you and get these bureaucrats out of your town. So my favorite scene is there's a moment where our office crew tries to come to work, and the two mayoral candidates have joined together to hold a rally in front of the office. And so the characters walk into a protest that's going on, and they stand back across the street and have a conversation about what they should do about the protest, which is fun in and of itself, because you've got the old lady worrying, and you've got Buck trying to decide if he can just leave to go get a cup of coffee, and you have Melissa, the office manager, kind of primping and like talking about whether or not she can get on camera, and if I go up there, what's the right angle. And while all of that is going on, River, the stoner, actually sneaks up onto stage and starts getting the crowd to chant. First, they're chanting things that are appropriate. He's jumping into the speech and like getting the crowd to chant things, but then he starts turning it to inappropriate sexual humor, and he gets the protest chanting inappropriately sexual things, which is one of my favorite moments, that he turns the crowd into this Howard Stern-esque moment where they're all just yelling about eating balls. And it's a great, the turn is subtle, but it's a lot of fun. Yeah, that's probably my favorite moment we've done so far.
My God. I'll
Do
tell
you
you,
have one, JP?
if this was a cartoon, this would be me and all my friends' favorite show. I mean, without a single doubt.
Yeah.
It's hilarious.
Again,
Jesus.
JP and I accept all money. So any monies people want to send, we'll take all the monies, and you can make a cartoon of the series. We're good with it.
So one of my favorite duos that we have is River and Bob. And River, the stoner, is responsible to carry around Bob's, who is a bag of bones. So it is a literal bag of human remains, because our ghosts have rules, and certain ghosts can't go without a certain distance from their bones. And he is one of those classes. So he works for nerds, but he has to be around his bones, and River is responsible for carrying them around. They are two different characters. Bob hates River so much because River is the stoner who is anti-war and all this, and you have Bob, who is a Korean War vet. And so Bob, we have one scene where he is ready to get into a house that has a really high level haunting in it. And he is racing, and he rams into the barrier because River hasn't gotten out of the car yet because he's taken his sweet time. And so I just love that dichotomy of the two, and having it be that River is responsible for Bob.
It's a fun scene. Bob's on the lawn, like he's taking the beach of Normandy, like screaming, let's go. And River's like in the car laughing about how Bob can't move a couple feet because River like won't get out of the car. River's like teasing him from the car. It's a fun scene. Yeah.
My God.
We go heartwarming sometimes too. Like there's a scene, Ethan, who's our protagonist, decides at one point to like try to do something nice for his grandmother, and to go check in on a graveyard that one of his grandmother's close friends died in. So Ethan heads to the graveyard to like check out what's going on, and there's a kid ghost there. Mm-hmm. And so the like pulling in these children ghosts, there's actually 5 of them there, pulling in the children's ghosts, creates a little like heartwarming moment where it's not all just like weird, crazy hijinks. There's some, tender moments as well, where like Ethan's realizing like, oh, this isn't all like fun and games. Like there's real lives here. There's people that have like honestly suffered, and we don't go too deep. We don't like get into like what the suffering is, but just the presence of, we will, but just the presence of the children in the graveyard, I think brings a poignant moment to the story, where you kind of get a moment to like slow down the comedy and kind of reflect on the fact that these people are really dealing in death, which, also goes to the whole bureaucracy of it. Because as much as we joke about like, hey, there's all these government agencies, we don't know what any of them do. Some of them do really serious things. And when it gets down to it, part of the lesson that Buck is trying to teach Ethan is that like, no, the job's actually really important. And like what they do is, it seems mundane and is full of paperwork, but in the end is like something that has to happen to make the world work and to make to care for people. So there's that there's the heartwarming moments in the story as well that I think I appreciate.
I would say we definitely, like, I am definitely trying to make sure that we are bringing to the table moments of dealing with grief, because if we're writing something about death, I think that that's something that I really want us to bring. And I know, Jeff, we've talked about this and you agree. And so like when I'm plotting things out and I'm making plans for how our characters are going to handle some of these ghosts, because ultimately the plan is that the ghosts transition onto some place unknown. And so there is that sense of loss. So that is a beat that I want to hit, but with this overtone of comedy, so that we can kind of care. My goal in life is that we could carry someone through a grieving process, but with this sense of levity.
Yeah, I think that's vital.
Well said.
You know, you go back to the beginnings of play, right? To begin with the Greeks, right? Comedy and drama, like, you know, the faces they have in the theater, with the right, whatever. That was one genre back then. It was understood that drama and comedy were one thing. It was just depending on how you and what way you showed it, basically. You know, especially all the comedy, all the comedians nowadays. Like, I think like we've proven in the last 10 or so years that you can really make a joke about anything, as long as like you're willing to hear it, and if the comedian is able to put it in a way that's humorous. But like, I've heard jokes about anything you can imagine. Like, there's no limitation. Especially if you listen to Bill Burr, the things that man will have you gutturally laughing about. It really makes you think sometimes. But that's what I love about comedy. It really is just how you feel like viewing not just the world, but not just that situation, not just that joke, but the world. I mean, you can look at anything negatively or positively.
Yeah, and even in these like big cast comedies that we're trying to fall in the genre of, like, you know, what makes The Office work is that we actually really care about Dwight and Michael Scott and Kevin and these like ridiculous people that are crazy, that make this world crazy, but you know, we really want to see them succeed. We want to see them win. And so that's part of, like, I think what ties us into comedy is that you go on this emotional journey with these characters, and it's not just about laughing at them, it's actually about like empathizing with them and joining in with them in their, like, in the absurdity of their life and their struggle, right? Like, so part of that, like, combining comedy and drama is, for us, is about like creating some characters that you really want to spend time with, not just because they're funny, but because you actually care about their lives and what's happening in their world.
And that's why we wanted to introduce Buck's partner right away. He's within the first 3 episodes, and it's because we have this very closed off character, this character that it would be difficult to relate to if you weren't in his head. And so we wanted to introduce someone, and in this case his partner, who can open him up to the reader so that they can get a feel that this is a fully fleshed character. This is a character whose personality to the outside world may be brash, but he has a heart. And if you can see that, then you relate to him immediately.
Yeah, and who's in this long-term committed relationship in which he really cares about somebody and somebody really cares about him, right? Like building that relationship between the two of them so that you can start to see Buck from a different perspective and really start to appreciate what his life is like.
Like Captain Holt, like, you know, until you meet his partner, you think the entire time that he's just like, you know, that guy. And then like you meet him, it's like, oh, okay, there we go. There is a fleshy undertone underneath that show. My God, honestly, it saddens me that I've kind of changed up the format. We're getting to the end of this podcast. But honestly, outside of like having fun with this, it truly feels like I've talked to like masters in the genre. Honestly, like I don't think I've ever thought this critically about comedy writing. Well, I have, but I guess just not successfully. So, because these are the insights I've heard on this are like generally things I'm gonna like run home with. Well, I guess I'm home, so it'll be a short run. Yep. But
you don't have to run far at all. Run far at all. Yeah. Unfortunately, for a guy like me, it would still win me. I'm gonna lose breath standing up from this chair and like walking 2 feet. I'm gonna be like, oh, it's too far. Yeah.
I should have brought rations.
That's right. It's too far. Call my children. Children, carry me up the stairs, please. Your father is tired.
Oh my God. Seriously, folks, I cannot stress this harder. J.T. Blakely, Google it. NRDS. Start reading the serialization. All for, and on top of that, just the way that the whole sales pitch at the beginning, I think still is like amazingly relevant right now. It really, you know, you're on the train, you're on the bus, you're waiting for an appointment. That's a 10-15 minute read. You can just pop up. And then when, emotions start, you start liking the characters a little bit more. Then episode 8 starts building the world. What more do you want? They hit you with it. I'm telling you, masters of the craft, people.
How much Instagram can you watch? Like seriously,
Exactly.
how many reels are you gonna go through? You don't need to watch any more TikTok.
And you saw 30% of them already.
7-minute reading. That's all you need.
Do you have
scrolling on?
Do you have bandwidth to watch Brooklyn Nine-Nine? No? Oh, well, read our stuff.
Yeah, read our
there
stuff.
You go.
Exactly.
It's better anyway.
Exactly.
And Brooklyn Nine-Nine's ending. You don't want to watch the ending. It's going to be sad. You don't watch the ending season of Brooklyn Nine-Nine. We're just getting started. We're getting warmed up. Yeah, sorry.
6 seasons in a movie. You heard it right here.
Perfect.
All right? No, they're going to double that. 12 seasons and 2 movies. Boom.
2 movies.
Yeah.
Cartoon. Yeah.
It's going to be
to me.
Nerds and then the Return of the Nerds, but then you're going to have the legal lawsuit of that with the actual movie, which in itself will make the 3rd movie for Nerds. The whole bureaucracy of getting a lawsuit. So to end this podcast off, and again, I honestly cannot thank both of you enough. For the people unaware, JP, he's like the Red Band of writing. If you're unaware, like Joe Rogan's friend, he is on every podcast I've ever heard of in my life.
Like a little, I just appear everywhere. That's my power.
And and you really need to look out. I've heard a couple episodes. The one with they did with Naomi Alt and Mrs. Daigle, just phenomenal stuff. And then you have the podcast with JP and Jeff. Wonder Friends, JT Blakely, boom, right? Everything they're doing. You have Jeff's own podcast with the Dialogue Doctor. You have. And they all also individually have their own works. So make sure to follow it. Go on the description, follow their links, click on it, do what you got to do, support the authors. Thank you again. Now, for the people, just to tag it off, say goodbye to the people, last words, anything that you feel like getting off. And again, if there's anything to promote, if your dog reviews cat food on YouTube, this is the time to drop that.
No, go buy the Vella. Go get it. Go
get the Vella.
Look, JT Blakely. Look us out.
One simple thing. Go check us out.
Go check us out. Start reading. We want to write more than 60, but you gotta buy it for us.
We want you to be nerds just like us.
Yeah.
Yes. Again, masters of the craft. Absolutely an honor to speak to both of you. I cannot wait for the future progress of everything that you have, and you definitely have a new fan for everything you guys are doing. My God, I am blown away. Thank you again, JP Rindfleisch, Jeff Elkins. Pick up their work. Thank you again. This is the end of the podcast. Thanks, AR's Tales, aka the A.R.T podcast. I've been Amin Abad, and to the side of me is the combination of JT Blakely, the legend. The legend. You heard it here, folks. Peace out, and check with us next Monday with our new episode.